Russia is a country spanning Eastern Europe and North Asia. It is the largest country in the world by area, extending across 11 time zones and sharing land borders with 14 countries. It is the world's 9th most populous country and Europe's most populous country. Russia is a highly urbanized country with 16 of its population centers, having more than 1 million people. Its capital and largest city is Moscow. St. Petersburg is Russia's second largest city and its cultural capital. The East Slavs emerged as a recognized group in Europe between the 3rd and 8th centuries CE. The first East Slavic state, Kievan Rus, arose in 9th century and adopted Orthodox Christianity from Byzantine Empire in 988. Kievan Rus ultimately disintegrated. Grand Duchy of Moscow led the unification of Russian lands, leading to the proclamation of Tsardom of Russia in 1547. By early 18th century, Russia had vastly expanded through conquest, annexation, and the efforts of Russian explorers developing into the Russian Empire, which remains the 3rd largest empire in history. However, with the Russian Revolution in 1917, Russia's monarchic rule was abolished and eventually replaced by the Russian SFSR, the world's first constitutionally socialist state. Following Russian Civil War, the Russian SFSR established the Soviet Union with 3 other Soviet republics, within which it was the largest and principal constituent. At the expense of millions of lives, Soviet Union underwent rapid industrialization in the 1930s and later played a decisive role for the Allies in World War II by leading large-scale efforts on the Eastern Front. With the onset of Cold War, it competed with United States for ideological dominance and international influence. The Soviet era of 20th century saw some of the most significant Russian technological achievements, including the first human-made satellite and the first human expedition into outer space. In 1991, the Russian SFSR emerged from the dissolution of the Soviet Union as the Russian Federation. A new constitution was adopted which established a federal semi-presidential system. Russia militarily involved in a number of conflicts in former Soviet states and other countries, including war with Georgia in 2008 and war with Ukraine since 2014, which involved the internationally unrecognized annexations of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea in 2014 and 4 other regions in 2022 during an ongoing invasion. Russia is a permanent member of United Nations Security Council, member state of the G20, SCO, BRICS, APEC, OSCE, WTO, and leading member state of post-Soviet organizations. It possesses the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons and has the 3rd highest military expenditure. Russia is considered a great power and also regional power. Internationally, Russia ranks low in measurements of democracy, human rights, and freedom of the press. As of 2024, Russia has a high-income economy which ranks 11th in the world by nominal GDP and 4th at purchasing power parity, relying on its vast mineral and energy resources. The world's 2nd largest for oil production and natural gas production. Russia is home to 32 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Russia's vast landmass stretches over the easternmost part of Europe and the northernmost part of Asia. It spans the northernmost edge of Eurasia and has the world's 4th longest coastline of over 37,653 kilometers, extending 9,000 kilometers east to west and 2,500 to 4,000 kilometers north to south. Russia, by landmass, is larger than 3 continents and has the same surface area as Pluto. Russia has 9 major mountain ranges found along the southernmost regions, which share a significant portion of the Caucasus Mountains, containing Mount Elbrus 5,642 meters, which is the highest peak in Russia and Europe. Altai and Sayon Mountains in Siberia. Siberian Mountains in the east. Kamchatka Peninsula in Russian Far East, containing Klyuchevskaya Sopka, 4,750 meters, which is the highest active volcano in Eurasia. Ural Mountains running north to south through the country's west are rich in mineral resources and form the traditional boundary between Europe and Asia. The lowest point in Russia and Europe is situated at the head of the Caspian Sea, where the Caspian Depression reaches 29 meters below sea level. Russia, as one of the world's only 3 countries bordering 3 oceans, has links with great number of seas. Its major islands and archipelagos include Novaya Zemlya, Franz Josef Land, Severnaya Zemlya, New Siberian Islands, Wrangel Island, Kuril Islands, 4 of which disputed with Japan, and Sakhalin. The Diomede Islands administered by Russia and United States are just 3.8 kilometers apart. Kunashir Island of the Kuril Islands is merely 20 kilometers from Hokkaido, Japan. Russia, home of over 100,000 rivers, has one of the world's largest surface water resources, with its lakes containing approximately 1/4 of the world's liquid fresh water. Lake Baikal, the largest and most prominent among Russia's freshwater bodies, is the world's deepest, purest, oldest, and most capacious freshwater lake, containing over 1/5 of the world's fresh surface water. Ladoga and Onega in northwestern Russia are two of the largest lakes in Europe. Russia is second only to Brazil by total renewable water resources. The Volga in western Russia, widely regarded as Russia's national river, is the longest river in Europe and forms the Volga Delta, the largest river delta in the continent. The Siberian rivers of Eb, Yenisei, Lena, and Amur are among the world's longest rivers. The size of Russia and remoteness of many areas from the sea result in the dominance of humid continental climate throughout most of the country except for the tundra and the extreme southwest. Mountain ranges in the south and east obstruct the flow of warm air masses from the Indian and Pacific Oceans, while the European plain spanning its west and north opens it to influence from the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. Most of northwest Russia and Siberia have a subarctic climate with extremely severe winters in the inner regions of northeast Siberia, mostly Sakha, where the northern pole of cold is located, with record low temperature of -71.2 degrees Celsius, and more moderate winters elsewhere. Russia's vast coastline along the Arctic Ocean and the Russian Arctic Islands have a polar climate. The coastal part of Krasnodar Krai on the Black Sea, most notably Sochi, and some coastal and interior strips of the North Caucasus possess humid subtropical climate with mild and wet winters. In many regions of East Siberia and Russian Far East, winter is dry compared to summer, while other parts of the country experience more even precipitation across seasons. Winter precipitation in most parts of the country usually falls as snow. The westernmost parts of Kaliningrad Oblast and some parts in the south of Krasnodar Krai and the North Caucasus have an oceanic climate. The region along the lower Volga and Caspian Sea coast, as well as some southernmost slivers of Siberia, possess a semi-arid climate. Throughout much of the territory, there are only two distinct seasons, winter and summer, as spring and autumn are usually brief. The coldest month is January, February on the coastline. The warmest is usually July. Great ranges of temperature are typical. In winter, temperatures get colder both from south to north and from west to east. Summers can be quite hot, even in Siberia. Climate change in Russia is causing more frequent wildfires and thawing the country's large expanse of permafrost. Russia, owing to its gigantic size, has diverse ecosystems including polar deserts, tundra, forest tundra, taiga, mixed and broadleaf forest, forest steppe, semidesert, and subtropics. About half of Russia's territory is forested, and it has the world's largest area of forest, which sequester some of the world's highest amounts of carbon dioxide. Russian biodiversity includes 12,500 species of vascular plants, 2,200 species of bryophytes, 3,000 species of lichens, 7,000 to 9,000 species of algae, 20,000 to 25,000 species of fungi. Russian fauna composed of 320 species of mammals, over 732 species of birds, 75 species of reptiles, 30 species of amphibians, 343 species of freshwater fish, high endemism, 1,500 species of saltwater fishes, 9 species of cyclostomata, 150,000 invertebrates, high endemism. Approximately 1,100 rare and endangered plant and animal species are included in the Russian Red Data Book. Russia's entirely natural ecosystems are conserved in nearly 15,000 specially protected natural territories of various statuses, occupying more than 10% of the country's total area. They include 45 biosphere reserves, 64 national parks, 101 nature reserves. Although in decline, the country still has many ecosystems which are still considered intact forest, mainly in the northern taiga areas and the subarctic tundra of Siberia. Russia has a mixed market economy, following a turbulent transition from the Soviet planned model during the 1990s. Much of the country's economic activity is centered on its abundant and varied natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas. It relies heavily on revenues from oil and gas-related taxes and export tariffs, which accounted for 45% of Russia's federal budget revenues in January 2022. Russia is classified by the World Bank as a high-income country. Russia has a labor force of roughly 70 million, which is the world's 8th largest, and low official unemployment rate of 4.1%. Russia has over 900 airports, ranking 7th in the world, of which the busiest is Sheremetyevo International Airport in Moscow. Russia's largest port is Port of Novorossiysk in Krasnodar Krai along Black Sea. Railway transport in Russia is mostly controlled by state-run Russian railways. Total length of common used railway tracks is the world's third longest, exceeding 87,000 kilometers. It has the world's third largest cultivated area at 1,265,267 square kilometers. However, due to the harshness of its environment, only 13% of its land is agricultural, with an additional 7.4% being arable. The country's agricultural land is considered part of the breadbasket of Europe. More than one-third of the sown area is devoted to fodder crops, and the remaining farmland is used industrial crops, vegetables, and fruits. The main product of Russian farming has always been grain, which occupies well over half the cropland. Russia is the world's largest exporter of wheat, the largest producer of barley and buckwheat, among the largest exporters of maize, sunflower oil, and leading producer of fertilizer. Various analysts of climate change adaptation foresee large opportunities for Russian agriculture during the rest of the 21st century as arability increases in Siberia, which would lead to both internal and external migration to the region. Owing to its large coastline along 3 oceans and 12 marginal seas, Russia maintains the world's 6th largest fishing industry, capturing nearly 5 million tons of fish in 2018. It is home to the world's finest caviar, the beluga, and produces about 1/3 of all canned fish and 1/4 of the world's total fresh and frozen fish. Russia ranked 10th worldwide in the number of scientific publications in 2020, with roughly 1.3 million papers. Since 1904, Nobel Prize were awarded to 26 Soviets and Russians in physics, chemistry, medicine, economy, literature, and peace. Russia ranked 60th in the Global Innovation Index in 2024, down from 45th in 2021. Nikolai Lobachevsky, who pioneered the non-Euclidean geometry. Pafnuty Chebyshev, a prominent Russian mathematicians. Nikolai Basov and Alexander Prokhorov were co-inventors of laser and maser. Vladimir Vernadsky is considered one of the founders of geochemistry, biogeochemistry, and radiogeology. Roscosmos is Russia's national space agency. The country's achievements in the field of space technology and space exploration traced back to Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the father of theoretical astronautics, whose works had inspired leading Soviet rocket engineers such as Sergei Korolev, Valentin Glushko, and many others who contributed to the success of the Soviet space program in the early stages of the space race and beyond. In 1957, the first Earth-orbiting artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, was launched. In 1961, the first human trip into space was successfully made by Yuri Gagarin. Many other Soviet and Russian space exploration records ensued. In 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the first and youngest woman in space, having flown a solo mission on Vostok 6. In 1965, Alexei Leonov became the first human to conduct a spacewalk, exiting the space capsule during Voskhod 2. In 1957, Laika, a Soviet space dog, became the first animal to orbit the Earth, aboard Sputnik 2. In 1966, Luna 9 became the first spacecraft to achieve a survivable landing on a celestial body, the Moon. In 1968, Zond 5 brought the first Earthlings, 2 tortoises and other life forms, to circumnavigate the Moon. In 1970, Venera 7 became the first spacecraft to land on another planet, Venus. In 1971, Mars 3 became the first spacecraft to land on Mars. During the same period, Lunokhod 1 became the first space exploration rover, while Salyut 1 became the world's first space station. Russia had 172 active satellites in space in April 2022, the world's third highest. Between the final flight of the Space Shuttle program in 2011 and 2020 SpaceX's first crewed mission, Soyuz rockets were the only launch vehicles capable of transporting astronauts to the ISS. Luna 25, launched in August 2023, was the first of the Lunar Globe Moon exploration program. Major tourist routes in Russia include a journey around the Golden Ring of Russia, a theme route of ancient Russian cities, cruises on large rivers such as the Volga, hikes on mountain ranges such as the Caucasus Mountains, journeys on the famous Trans-Siberian Railway. Russia's most visited and popular landmarks include Red Square, Peterhof Palace, Kazan Kremlin, Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius and Lake Baikal. Moscow, the nation's cosmopolitan capital and historic core, is a bustling modern megacity. It retains classical and Soviet-era architecture while boasting high art, world-class ballet, and modern skyscrapers. St. Petersburg, the imperial capital, is famous for its classical architecture, cathedrals, museums, theaters, white nights, crisscrossing rivers, and numerous canals. Russia is famed worldwide for its rich museums such as State Russian, State Hermitage, Tretyakov Gallery, and theaters such as Bolshoi and Mariinsky. The Moscow Kremlin and St. Basil's Cathedral are among the cultural landmarks of Russia. Russia's population 144.7 million in 2021, excluding Crimea and Sevastopol, growing from 142.8 million in 2010. It is the most populous country in Europe and ninth most populous in the world. With a population density of 8 inhabitants per square kilometer, Russia is one of the world's most sparsely populated countries, with the vast majority of its people concentrated within its western part. The country is highly urbanized, with 2/3 of the population living in towns and cities. Russia is a multinational state with many subnational entities associated with different minorities. There are over 193 ethnic groups nationwide. In 2010 census, roughly 81% of the population were ethnic Russians and the remaining 19% of the population were ethnic minorities, while over 4/5 of Russia's population was of European descent, of whom the vast majority were Slavs, with a substantial minority of Finno-Ugric and Germanic peoples. According to United Nations, Russia's immigrant population is the world's third largest, numbering over 11.6 million, most of which are from post-Soviet states, mainly from Central Asia. Russian is the official and predominantly spoken language in Russia. It is the most spoken native language in Europe, the most geographically widespread language of Eurasia, as well as the world's most widely spoken Slavic language. Russian is one of 2 official languages aboard the International Space Station, as well as one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations. Russia is a multilingual nation. Approximately 100 to 150 minority languages are spoken across the country. According to 2010 Russian census, 137.5 million across the country spoke Russian, 4.3 million spoke Tatar, and 1.1 million spoke Ukrainian. The constitution gives the country's individual republics the right to establish their own state languages in addition to Russian, as well as guarantee its citizens the right to preserve their native language and to create conditions for its study and development. Russia is constitutionally a secular state that officially enshrines freedom of religion. The largest religion is Eastern Orthodox Christianity, chiefly represented by the Russian Orthodox Church, which is legally recognized for its special role in the country's history and the formation and development of its spirituality and culture. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism are recognized by Russian law as the traditional religions of the country, constituting its historical heritage. Islam is the second largest religion in Russia and is traditional among the majority of peoples in the North Caucasus and some Turkic peoples in the Volga-Ural region. Large populations of Buddhists are found in Kalmykia, Buryatia, Zabaikalsky Krai, and they are the vast majority of the population in Tuva. Many Russians practice other religions, including Rodnovery, Ashayanism, ethnic paganisms, and inter-pagan movements such as Ringing Cedars Anastasianism, various movements of Hinduism, Siberian shamanism and Tengrism, various neo-theosophical movements such as Roerichism, and other faiths. Some religious minorities have faced oppression and some have been banned in the country. Notably in 2017, the Jehovah's Witnesses were outlawed in Russia, facing persecution ever since, after having been declared an extremist and non-traditional faith. Russia has an adult literacy rate of 100% and has compulsory education for a duration of 11 years, exclusively for children aged 7 to 18. It grants free education to its citizens by constitution. The Ministry of Education of Russia is responsible for primary and secondary education, as well as vocational education, while the Ministry of Education and Science of Russia is responsible for science and higher education. Admission to an institute of higher education is selective and highly competitive. First-degree courses usually take 5 years. The oldest and largest universities in Russia are Moscow State University and St. Petersburg State University. There are 10 highly prestigious federal universities across the country. Russia, by constitution, guarantees free, universal health care for all Russian citizens through a compulsory state health insurance program. Russian writers and philosophers have played an important role in the development of European literature and thought. Russians have also greatly influenced classical music, ballet, sport, painting, and cinema. The nation has also made pioneering contributions to science and technology and space exploration. Russia is home to 32 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, 21 out of which are cultural, while 31 more sites lie on the tentative list. The large global Russian diaspora has also played a major role in spreading Russian culture throughout the world. Russia's national symbol, the double-headed eagle, dates back to the Tsardom period and is featured in its coat of arms and heraldry. The Russian bear and Mother Russia are often used as national personifications of the country. Matryoshka dolls are considered a cultural icon of Russia. Russia has 8 public, patriotic, and religious official holidays. The year starts with New Year's Day on the 1st of January, soon followed by Russian Orthodox Christmas on the 7th of January, the 2 other countries' most popular holidays. Defender of the Fatherland Day, dedicated to men, is celebrated on the 23rd of February. International Women's Day on the 8th of March gained momentum in Russia during the Soviet era. The annual celebration of women has become so popular, especially among Russian men, that Moscow's flower vendors often see profits 15 times more than other holidays. Spring and Labor Day, originally a Soviet-era holiday dedicated to workers, is celebrated on the 1st of May. Victory Day, which honors Soviet victory over Nazi Germany and the end of World War II in Europe, is celebrated on the 9th of May as an annual large parade in Moscow's Red Square and marks the famous Immortal Regiment civil event. Other patriotic holidays include Russia Day on the 12th of June, celebrated to commemorate Russia's declaration of sovereignty from the collapsing Soviet Union, and Unity Day on the 4th of November, commemorating the 1612 uprising which marked the end of the Polish occupation of Moscow. There are many popular non-public holidays. Old New Year is celebrated on the 14th of January. Maslenitsa is an ancient and popular East Slavic folk holiday. Cosmonautics Day on the 12th of April, in tribute to the first human trip into space. 2 major Christian holidays are Easter and Trinity Sunday. History of Russian architecture begins with early woodcraft buildings of ancient Slavs and the church architecture of Kievan Rus. Following Christianization of Kievan Rus, for several centuries it was influenced predominantly by Byzantine architecture. Aristotle Fioravanti and other Italian architects brought Renaissance trends into Russia. 16th century saw development of unique tent-like churches and onion dome design, which is a distinctive feature of Russian architecture. In 17th century, fiery style of ornamentation flourished in Moscow and Yaroslav, gradually paving the way for Narishian Baroque of the 1680s. After the reforms of Peter the Great, Russia's architecture became influenced by Western European styles. The 18th century taste for Rococo architecture led to the works of Bartolomeo Rastrelli and his followers. The most influential Russian architects of the 18th century, Vasily Bazanov, Matvey Kazakov, and Ivan Starov, created lasting monuments in Moscow and St. Petersburg and established a base for the more Russian forms that followed. During the reign of Catherine the Great, St. Petersburg was transformed into an outdoor museum of neoclassical architecture. Under Alexander I, Empire style became the de facto architectural style. The second half of the 19th century was dominated by the Neo-Byzantine and Russian Revival style. In the early 20th century, Russian neoclassical revival became a trend. Prevalent styles of the late 20th century were Art Nouveau, Constructivism, and Socialist Classicism. The first human settlement on Russia dates back to Oldowan period in the early Lower Paleolithic. About 2 million years ago, representatives of Homo erectus migrated to the Taman Peninsula in southern Russia. Flint tools, 1.5 million years old, discovered in North Caucasus. Radiocarbon-dated specimens from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains estimate the oldest Denisovan specimen lived 195 to 122,700 years ago. Fossils of Deni, an archaic human hybrid that was half Neanderthal and half Denisovan and lived 90,000 years ago, was also found within the latter cave. Russia was home to some of the last surviving Neanderthals from 45,000 years ago found in Mezhmayskia Cave. The first trace of an early modern human in Russia dates back to 45,000 years, in western Siberia. The discovery of high-concentration cultural remains of anatomically modern humans from at least 40,000 years ago was found at Kostyonki, Borshkiovo and Sunjir, dating back to 34,600 years ago, both in western Russia. Humans reached Arctic Russia at least 40,000 years ago in Mamontovaya Curia. Ancient North Eurasian populations from Siberia, genetically similar to Malta-Ibure culture and Afontova Gora, were an important genetic contributor to ancient Native Americans and eastern hunter-gatherers. The Kurgan hypothesis places the Volga-Dnieper region of southern Russia and Ukraine as the Urheimat of Proto-Indo-Europeans. Early Indo-European migrations from the Pontic, Caspian steppe of Ukraine and Russia spread Yamnaya ancestry and Indo-European languages across large parts of Eurasia. Nomadic pastoralism developed in Pontic, Caspian steppe beginning in the Chalcolithic. Remnants of these steppe civilizations were discovered in places such as Ipatovo, Sintashta, Arkaim and Pazyryk, which bear the earliest known traces of horses in warfare. The genetic makeup of speakers of Uralic language family in northern Europe was shaped by migration from Siberia that began at least 3,500 years ago. In the 3rd to 4th centuries CE, Gothic kingdom of Oyum existed in southern Russia, which was later overrun by Huns. Between 3rd and 6th centuries CE, Bosporan kingdom, which was a Hellenistic polity that succeeded the Greek colonies, was also overwhelmed by nomadic invasions led by warlike tribes such as the Huns and Eurasian Avars. The Khazars, who were of Turkic origin, ruled the steppes between the Caucasus in the south to the east past the Volga River basin and west as far as Kiev on the Dnieper River until the 10th century. After them came the Pechenegs, who created a large confederacy which was subsequently taken over by the Cumans and the Kipchaks. The ancestors of Russians are among the Slavic tribes that separated from the Proto-Indo-Europeans who appeared in the northeastern part of Europe c. 1,500 years ago. The East Slavs gradually settled western Russia, approximately between modern Moscow and St. Petersburg, in 2 waves. One moving from Kiev towards present-day Suzdal and Murom, and another from Polotsk towards Novgorod and Rostov. Prior to Slavic migration, that territory was populated by Finno-Ugrian peoples. From the 7th century onwards, the incoming East Slavs slowly assimilated the native Finno-Ugrians. The establishment of the first East Slavic states in the 9th century coincided with the arrival of Varangians, the Vikings who ventured along the waterways extending from the eastern Baltic to the Black and Caspian Seas. According to the primary chronicle, a Varangian from the Rus people, named Rurik, was elected ruler of Novgorod in 862. In 882, his successor Oleg ventured south and conquered Kiev, which had been previously paying tribute to the Khazars. Rurik's son Igor and Igor's son Sviatoslav subsequently subdued all local East Slavic tribes to Kievan rule, destroyed the Khazar Khaganate and launched several military expeditions to Bulgaria, Byzantium and Persia. In 10th to 11th centuries, Kievan Rus became one of the largest and most prosperous states in Europe. By 12th century, Kiev lost its preeminence and Kievan Rus had fragmented into different principalities. Prince Andrei Bogolyubsky sacked Kiev in 1169 and made Vladimir his base, leading to political power being shifted to the northeast. Led by Prince Alexander Nevsky, Novgorodians repelled the invading Swedes in the Battle of the Neva in 1240, as well as the Germanic Crusaders in the Battle on the Ice in 1242. Kievan Rus finally fell to the Mongol invasion from 1237 to 1240, which resulted in the sacking of Kiev and other cities, as well as the death of a major part of the population. The invaders, later known as Tatars, formed the state of the Golden Horde, which ruled over Russia for the next 2 centuries. Only Novgorod Republic escaped foreign occupation after it agreed to pay tribute to the Mongols. Galicia Volhynia later absorbed by Lithuania and Poland, while Novgorod Republic continued to prosper in the north. In the northeast, Byzantine Slavic traditions of Kievan Rus were adapted to form the Russian autocratic state. The destruction of Kievan Rus saw the eventual rise of Grand Duchy of Moscow, initially a part of Vladimir Suzdal. While still under the domain of Mongol Tatars and with their connivance, Moscow began to assert its influence in the region in the early 14th century, gradually becoming the leading force in the gathering of the Russian lands. When the seat of the Metropolitan of Russian Orthodox Church moved to Moscow in 1325, its influence increased. Moscow's last rival, the Novgorod Republic, prospered as the chief fur trade center and the easternmost port of the Hanseatic League. Led by Prince Dmitry Donskoy of Moscow, the united army of Russian principalities inflicted a milestone defeat on the Mongol Tatars in the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380. Moscow gradually absorbed its parent duchy and surrounding principalities, including formerly strong rivals such as Tver and Novgorod. Ivan III the Great threw off the control of Golden Horde and consolidated the whole of northern Rus under Moscow's dominion and was the first Russian ruler to take the title Grand Duke of all Rus. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Moscow claimed succession to the legacy of Eastern Roman Empire. Ivan III married Sophia Palaiologina, the niece of the last Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI, and made the Byzantine double-headed eagle his own and eventually Russia's coat of arms. Vasily III united all of Russia by annexing the last few independent Russian states in the early 16th century. Under Peter the Great, Russia was proclaimed an empire in 1721 and established as one of the European great powers. Ruling from 1682 to 1725, Peter defeated Sweden in the Great Northern War, 1700 to 1721, securing Russia's access to the sea and sea trade. In 1703, on the Baltic Sea, Peter founded St. Petersburg as Russia's new capital. Throughout his rule, sweeping reforms which brought significant Western European cultural influences to Russia. He was succeeded by Catherine I, 1725 to 1727, followed by Peter II, 1727 to 1730, and Anna. The reign of Peter I's daughter Elizabeth in 1741 to 1762 saw Russia's participation in the Seven Years' War, 1756 to 1763. During the conflict, Russian troops overran East Prussia, reaching Berlin. However, upon Elizabeth's death, all these conquests were returned to the Kingdom of Prussia by pro-Prussian Peter III of Russia. Catherine II, who ruled in 1762 to 1796, presided over the Russian Age of Enlightenment. She extended Russian political control over the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and annexed most of its territories into Russia, making it the most populous country in Europe. In the south, after the successful Russo-Turkish wars against the Ottoman Empire, Catherine advanced Russia's boundary to the Black Sea by dissolving the Crimean Khanate and annexing Crimea. As a result of victories over Qajar Iran through the Russo-Persian Wars by the first half of 19th century, Russia also conquered the Caucasus. Catherine's successor, her son Paul, was unstable and focused predominantly on domestic issues. Following his short reign, Catherine's strategy was continued with Alexander I's, 1801 to 1825, wresting of Finland from the weakened Sweden in 1809 and Bessarabia from the Ottomans in 1812. In North America, the Russians became the first Europeans to reach and colonize Alaska. In 1803 to 1806, the first Russian circumnavigation was made. In 1820, a Russian expedition discovered the continent of Antarctica. During Napoleonic Wars, Russia joined alliances with various European powers and fought against France. French invasion of Russia at the height of Napoleon's power in 1812 reached Moscow but eventually failed as the obstinate resistance in combination with the bitterly cold Russian winter led to a disastrous defeat of invaders in which the pan-European Grande Army faced utter destruction. Led by Mikhail Kutuzov and Michael Andreas Barclay de Tolly, the Imperial Russian Army ousted Napoleon and drove throughout Europe in the War of the Sixth Coalition, ultimately entering Paris. Alexander I controlled Russia's delegation at the Congress of Vienna, which defined the map of post-Napoleonic Europe. The officers who pursued Napoleon into Western Europe brought ideas of liberalism back to Russia and attempted to curtail the Tsar's powers during the abortive Decembrist revolt of 1825. At the end of the conservative reign of Nicholas I, 1825 to 1855, a zenith period of Russia's power and influence in Europe was disrupted by defeat in the Crimean War. Nicholas's successor Alexander II, 1855 to 1881, enacted significant changes throughout the country, including the Emancipation Reform of 1861. These reforms spurred industrialization and modernized the Imperial Russian Army, which liberated much of Balkans from Ottoman rule in the aftermath of the 1877 to 1878 Russo-Turkish War. During most of 19th and early 20th century, Russia and Britain colluded over Afghanistan and its neighboring territories in Central and South Asia, the rivalry between the two major European empires known as the Great Game. The late 19th century saw the rise of various socialist movements in Russia. Alexander II was assassinated in 1881 by revolutionary terrorists. The reign of his son Alexander III, 1881 to 1894, was less liberal but more peaceful. Under last Russian Emperor, Nicholas II, 1894 to 1917, the Revolution of 1905 was triggered by the humiliating failure of the Russo-Japanese War. The uprising was put down, but the government was forced to concede major reforms, Russian Constitution of 1906, including granting freedoms of speech and assembly, the legalization of political parties and the creation of an elected legislative body, the State Duma. In 1914, Russia entered World War I in response to Austria-Hungary's declaration of war on Russia's ally Serbia and fought across multiple fronts while isolated from its Triple Entente allies. In 1916, Brusilov offensive of Imperial Russian Army almost completely destroyed the Austro-Hungarian army. However, the already existing public distrust of the regime was deepened by the rising costs of war, high casualties, and rumors of corruption and treason. All this formed the climate for the Russian Revolution of 1917, carried out in two major acts. In early 1917, Nicholas II was forced to abdicate. He and his family were imprisoned and later executed during Russian Civil War. The monarchy was replaced by a shaky coalition of political parties that declared itself the provisional government and proclaimed the Russian Republic. On the 19th of January, 1918, Russian Constituent Assembly declared Russia a democratic federal republic, thus ratifying the provisional government's decision. The next day, the Constituent Assembly was dissolved by the All-Russian Central Executive Committee. An alternative socialist establishment coexisted, the Petrograd Soviet, wielding power through the democratically elected councils of workers and peasants, called Soviets. The rule of the new authorities only aggravated the crisis in the country instead of resolving. Eventually, the October Revolution led by Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin overthrew the provisional government and gave full governing power to the Soviets, leading to the creation of the world's first socialist state. The Russian Civil War broke out between the anti-communist White Movement and the Bolsheviks with its Red Army. In the aftermath of signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that concluded hostilities with the Central Powers of World War I, Bolshevist Russia surrendered most of its western territories, which hosted 34% of its population, 54% of its industries, 32% of its agricultural land and 90% of its coal mines. The Allied powers launched an unsuccessful military intervention in support of anti-communist forces. In the meantime, both Bolsheviks and White Movement carried out campaigns of deportations and executions against each other, known respectively as Red Terror and White Terror. By the end of the violent civil war, Russia's economy and infrastructure were heavily damaged and as many as 10 million perished during the war, mostly civilians. Millions became white émigrés, and the Russian famine of 1921 to 1922 claimed up to 5 million victims. On the 30th of December, 1922, Lenin and his aides formed the Soviet Union by joining the Russian SFSR into a single state with Byelorussian, Transcaucasian, and Ukrainian republics. Eventually, internal border changes and annexations during World War II created a union of 15 republics. The largest in size and population being the Russian SFSR, which dominated the Union politically, culturally, and economically. Following Lenin's death in 1924, a troika was designated to take charge. Eventually, Joseph Stalin, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, managed to suppress all opposition factions and consolidate power in his hands to become the country's dictator by the 1930s. Leon Trotsky, the main proponent of world revolution, was exiled from the Soviet Union in 1929, and Stalin's idea of socialism in one country became the official line. The continued internal struggle in the Bolshevik Party culminated in the Great Purge. Under Stalin's leadership, the government launched a command economy, industrialization of largely rural country, and collectivization of its agriculture. During this period of rapid economic and social change, millions of people were sent to penal labor camps, including many political convicts for their suspected or real opposition to Stalin's rule, and millions were deported and exiled to remote areas of the Soviet Union. The transitional disorganization of the country's agriculture combined with harsh state policies and drought led to Soviet famine 1932 to 1933, which killed 5.7 to 8.7 million, 3.3 million of them in the Russian SFSR. The Soviet Union, ultimately, made the costly transformation from a largely agrarian economy to a major industrial powerhouse within a short span of time. Soviet Union entered World War II on the 17th of September, 1939 with its invasion of Poland in accordance with a secret protocol within the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union later invaded Finland and occupied and annexed the Baltic states as well as parts of Romania. On the 22nd of June, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, opening the Eastern Front, the largest theater of World War II. Eventually, 5 million Red Army troops were captured by the Nazis. The latter deliberately starved to death or otherwise killed 3.3 million Soviet POWs and a vast number of civilians as the Hunger Plan sought to fulfill General Plan Ost. Although the Wehrmacht had considerable early success, their attack was halted in the Battle of Moscow. Subsequently, the Germans were dealt major defeats, first at the Battle of Stalingrad in the winter 1942 to 1943 and then in the Battle of Kursk in the summer of 1943. Another German failure was the Siege of Leningrad, in which the city was fully blockaded on land between 1941 and 1944 by German and Finnish forces and suffered starvation and more than 1 million deaths but never surrendered. Soviet forces steamrolled through Eastern and Central Europe in 1944 to 1945 and captured Berlin in May 1945. In August 1945, the Red Army invaded Manchuria and ousted the Japanese from Northeast Asia, contributing to the Allied victory over Japan. The 1941 to 1945 period of World War II is known in Russia as the Great Patriotic War. The Soviet Union, along with United States, United Kingdom, and China, were considered the Big Four of Allied powers in World War II and later became the Four Policemen, which was the foundation of the United Nations Security Council. During the war, Soviet civilian and military death were about 26 to 27 million, accounting for about half of all World War II casualties. The Soviet economy and infrastructure suffered massive devastation, which caused the Soviet famine 1946 to 1947. However, at the expense of a large sacrifice, Soviet Union emerged as a global superpower. After World War II, according to the Potsdam Conference, the Red Army occupied parts of Eastern and Central Europe, including East Germany and eastern regions of Austria. Dependent communist governments were installed in the Eastern Bloc satellite states. After becoming the world's second nuclear power, Soviet Union established the Warsaw Pact alliance and entered into a struggle for global dominance, known as the Cold War, with the rivaling United States and NATO. After Stalin's death in 1953 and short period of collective rule, the new leader Nikita Khrushchev denounced Stalin and launched the policy of de-Stalinization, releasing many political prisoners from the Gulag labor camps. The general easement of repressive policies known as the Khrushchev Thaw. At the same time, Cold War tensions reached its peak when the two rivals clashed over the deployment of the United States Jupiter missiles in Turkey and Soviet missiles in Cuba. In 1957, Soviet Union launched the world's first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1. Thus, starting the space age. Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth, aboard the Vostok 1 crewed spacecraft on the 12th of April, 1961. Following the ousting of Khrushchev in 1964, another period of collective rule ensued until Leonid Brezhnev became the leader. The era of the 1970s and early 1980s was later designated as the era of stagnation. The 1965 Kosygin reform aimed for partial decentralization of the Soviet economy. In 1979, after a communist-led revolution in Afghanistan, Soviet forces invaded the country, ultimately starting the Soviet-Afghan War. In May 1988, the Soviets started to withdraw from Afghanistan due to international opposition, persistent anti-Soviet guerrilla warfare and a lack of support by Soviet citizens. From 1985 onwards, the last Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, who sought to enact liberal reforms in the Soviet system, introduced the policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, in an attempt to end the period of economic stagnation and to democratize the government. This, however, led to the rise of strong nationalist and separatist movements across the country. Prior to 1991, Soviet economy was the world's second largest, but during its final years, it went into a crisis. By 1991, economic and political turmoil began to boil over as the Baltic states chose to secede from the Soviet Union. On the 17th of March, a referendum was held in which vast majority of participating citizens voted in favor of changing the Soviet Union into a renewed federation. In June 1991, Boris Yeltsin became the first directly elected president in Russian history when he was elected president of the Russian SFSR. In August 1991, a coup d'état attempt by members of Gorbachev's government, directed against Gorbachev and aimed at preserving the Soviet Union, instead led to the end of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. On the 25th of December, 1991, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, along with contemporary Russia, 14 other post-Soviet states emerged. The economic and political collapse of the Soviet Union led Russia into a deep and prolonged depression. During and after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, wide-ranging reforms including privatization and market and trade liberalization were undertaken, including radical changes along the lines of shock therapy. The privatization largely shifted control of enterprises from state agencies to individuals with inside connections in the government, which led to the rise of Russian oligarchs. Many of the newly rich moved billions in cash and assets outside of the country in an enormous capital flight. The depression of the economy led to the collapse of social service. The birth rate plummeted while the death rate skyrocketed and millions plunged into poverty, while extreme corruption as well as criminal gangs and organized crime rose significantly. In late 1993, tensions between Yeltsin and the Russian parliament culminated in a constitutional crisis which ended violently through military force. During the crisis, Yeltsin was backed by Western governments and over 100 people were killed. In December, a referendum was held and approved which introduced a new constitution, giving the president enormous powers. The 1990s were plagued by armed conflicts in the North Caucasus, both local ethnic skirmishes and separatist Islamist insurrections. From the time Chechen separatists declared independence in the early 1990s, an intermittent guerrilla war was fought between the rebel groups and Russian forces. Terrorist attacks against civilians were carried out by Chechen separatists, claiming the lives of thousands of Russian civilians. After dissolution of Soviet Union, Russia assumed responsibility for settling the latter's external debts. In 1992, most consumer price controls were eliminated, causing extreme inflation and significantly devaluing the ruble. High budget deficits coupled with increasing capital flight and inability to pay back debts caused the 1998 Russian financial crisis, which resulted in a further GDP decline. On the 31st of December, 1999, President Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned, handing the post to recently appointed Prime Minister and his chosen successor, Vladimir Putin. Putin then won the 2000 presidential election and defeated the Chechen insurgency in the Second Chechen War. Putin won a second presidential term in 2004. High oil prices and rise in foreign investment saw the Russian economy and living standards improve significantly. Putin's rule increased stability while transforming Russia into an authoritarian state. In 2008, Putin took the post of prime minister while Dmitry Medvedev was elected president for one term, to hold on to power despite legal term limits. This period described as a tan democracy. Following diplomatic crisis with neighboring Georgia, the Russo-Georgian War took place during 1 to the 12th of August, 2008, resulting in Russia recognizing two separatist states in the territories that it occupies in Georgia. It was the first European war of the 21st century. In early 2014, following a pro-Western revolution in neighboring Ukraine, Russia annexed Crimea after a disputed referendum on the status of Crimea was staged under Russian occupation. The annexation generated an insurgency in the Donbas region of Ukraine, supported by Russian military intervention as part of an undeclared war against Ukraine. Russian mercenaries and military forces, with the support of local separatist militias, waged a war in eastern Ukraine against the new Ukrainian government after the Russian government fostered anti-government and pro-Russian protests in the region, although most residents had opposed secession from Ukraine. In a major escalation of the conflict, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, 2022. The invasion marked the largest conventional war in Europe since World War II and was met with international condemnation as well as expanded sanctions against Russia. As a result, Russia was expelled from the Council of Europe in March and was suspended from the United Nations Human Rights Council in April. In September, following successful Ukrainian counteroffensives, Putin announced a partial mobilization. Russia's first mobilization since Operation Barbarossa. In the end of September, Putin proclaimed the annexation of 4 partially occupied Ukrainian regions, the largest annexation in Europe since World War II. Putin and Russian-installed leaders signed treaties of accession, internationally unrecognized and widely denounced as illegal. As a result of the invasion, hundreds of thousands of people estimated killed or injured, while Russia accused of numerous war crimes. The war in Ukraine has further exacerbated Russia's demographic crisis. In June 2023, the Wagner Group, a private military contractor fighting for Russia in Ukraine, declared an open rebellion against the Russian Ministry of Defense, capturing Rostov-on-Don, before beginning a march on Moscow. However, after negotiations between Wagner and the Belarusian government, the rebellion was called off. The leader of the rebellion, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was later killed in a plane crash. Russian cuisine has been formed by climate, cultural and religious traditions, and the vast geography of the nation, and it shares similarities with the cuisines of its neighboring countries. Crops of rye, wheat, barley, and millet provide the ingredients for various breads, pancakes and cereals, as well as for many drinks. Bread, of many varieties, 630, is very popular across Russia. Flavorful soups and stews include shi, borscht, uka, solyanka, and okroshka. Smetana, a heavy sour cream, and mayonnaise are often added to soups and salads. Piroshki, blini, and siniki are native types of pancakes. Beef stroganoff, chicken Kiev, pelmeni, and shashlik are popular meat dishes. Other meat dishes include stuffed cabbage rolls, golubtsi, usually filled with meat. Salads include olivier salad, vinaigrette, and dressed herring. Russia's national non-alcoholic drink is kvass and the national alcoholic drink is vodka. Its production in Russia, and elsewhere, dates back to the 14th century. The country has the world's highest vodka consumption, while beer is the most popular alcoholic beverage. Wine has become increasingly popular in Russia in the 21st century. Tea has been popular in Russia for centuries.